You think you know Mr. Bean. You think you've been watching a comedy for all these years. But what if I told you that everything you believed was a lie? What if I told you that the man behind that innocent face has been living with a secret so devastating, so heartbreaking, that it changed the course of his entire life? Rowan Atkinson didn't choose to be silent. He was forced into silence. And the reason why will destroy everything you thought you knew about laughter, about pain, and about the price of fame. For decades, we've watched him struggle with simple words, stumble through basic conversations, retreat into a world where gestures speak louder than voices. We thought it was genius. We thought it was brilliant physical comedy. We were wrong. This man, this incredibly gifted, intelligent, educated man, a man with a master's degree from Oxford, a man who could have conquered any field he chose, deliberately chose to lock away his voice. Because speaking brought back memories too painful to bear. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will shatter your heart. A story about a little boy who learned that words could wound deeper than any physical pain. A story about how trauma doesn't just shape us, it can silence us forever. The truth behind Mr. Bean's silence isn't entertainment. It's survival. January 6, 1955. A little boy named Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born in County Durham, England. The youngest of 4 brothers. A family that looked perfect from the outside. But perfection is often the cruelest mask. Rowan wasn't like other children. He was different. Special. His mind worked in ways that amazed adults and confused his peers. While other kids played with toys, Rowan was fascinated by machines, by how things worked, by the intricate details that others ignored. But being different, in a small English town in the 1960s, was dangerous. The bullying started early. Every day at school became a battlefield. Not the kind of bullying you see in movies. This was systematic, relentless, psychological warfare designed to break a child's spirit. They mocked the way he spoke. You see, Rowan had a stutter. A severe speech impediment that made every word a struggle, every sentence a mountain to climb. When he tried to speak up in class, when he tried to defend himself, when he tried to make friends, his words would get trapped, twisted, turned against him. STST stupid Rowan, they would chant. Can't even TT talk properly. Day after day, week after week, year after year. But the worst part wasn't the children. It was the silence of the adults who were supposed to protect him. Teachers who looked away. Parents who said boys will be boys. A system that failed him when he needed it most. So Rowan learned something that would define the rest of his life. Words could hurt. Words could humiliate. Words could destroy. But silence was safe. In silence, he couldn't be mocked. In silence, he couldn't stumble. In silence, he found the only peace a broken child could find. And that little boy made a promise to himself. A promise that would echo through decades. He would never let words hurt him again. By the age of 13, Rowan had built walls so high around himself that even his own family couldn't reach him. He stopped trying to speak in public. He stopped raising his hand in class. He became a ghost in his own life. But genius finds a way. While other teenagers were discovering music and sports, Rowan discovered something else. Something magical. Something that would save his life. Physical comedy. It started small. A funny face in the mirror. An exaggerated walk down the hallway. Simple gestures that could make people laugh without him having to say a single word. For the first time in years, people weren't laughing at him. They were laughing with him. And in that laughter, Rowan found something he thought he'd lost forever. Power. When he enrolled at Oxford University, something incredible happened. This broken, stuttering boy transformed into something extraordinary. He joined the Dramatic Society, not to speak, but to perform. Not to use words, but to transcend them. His fellow students were amazed. Here was someone who could convey more emotion, more story, more truth in a single gesture than most actors could with an entire monologue. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that every character Rowan created was a piece of his fractured soul trying to find its way home. The clumsiness wasn't an act. It was the physical manifestation of a mind that had learned to distrust itself. The childlike innocence wasn't comedy. It was the little boy inside him who had never been allowed to grow up safely. And the silence, the beautiful, profound silence, was his shield against a world that had taught him that his voice didn't matter. When Mr. Bean was born in the late 1980s, Rowan thought he was creating a character. But the truth was darker. The truth was more painful. He wasn't creating Mr. Bean. He was revealing himself. The man who couldn't speak without stuttering had found a way to communicate with the entire world. The child who had been broken by words had learned to heal others without them. But healing others doesn't always heal yourself. 1990 Mr. Bean premiered on British television. Within weeks, it became a phenomenon. Within months, it was broadcasting in over 200 countries. Within years, Rowan Atkinson became one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. The world fell in love with this innocent, bumbling character who could turn the simplest tasks into adventures. Grocery shopping became art. Getting dressed became poetry. Ordering at a restaurant became a masterpiece of physical storytelling. Critics called it genius. Audiences called it hilarious. The industry called it revolutionary. But success came with a price nobody saw coming. Every time Rowan put on that iconic tweed jacket, every time he tied that red tie, every time he became Mr. Bean, he was disappearing a little more. The character that had saved him was now consuming him. In interviews, people expected Mr. Bean. When he spoke normally, when he used his real voice, when he showed his true intelligence, audiences were disappointed. They didn't want Rowan Atkinson, the Oxford graduate. They didn't want Rowan Atkinson, the brilliant mind. They wanted the silent man-child who couldn't figure out how to use a toothbrush. And slowly, terrifyingly, Rowan began to realize something that would haunt him for decades. He had become so good at hiding behind Mr. Bean that he was forgetting who Rowan Atkinson actually was. The stutter that had plagued his childhood? It came back. Not on screen, but in real life. In interviews, in conversations, in moments when he tried to be himself. The very thing that had healed him was breaking him all over again. Fame brought money, recognition, global adoration. But it also brought something else. Something darker. Complete and utter loneliness. Because when the whole world loves a character you've created, who's left to love the real you? Especially when you're not even sure the real you exists anymore. The man who had learned to hide behind silence as a child was now hiding behind laughter as an adult. And the mask was becoming harder and harder to take off. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and crowds, Rowan Atkinson was falling apart. The man who made millions smile had forgotten how to smile himself. By the mid-1990s, Mr. Bean wasn't just a character anymore. It was a prison. A golden cage that trapped him in a role he could never escape. Children would approach him on the street, expecting him to be funny, to entertain them, to be the lovable fool they saw on television. But when Rowan tried to speak to them normally, when he tried to be kind and genuine, they walked away disappointed. "You're not like Mr. Bean at all," one little girl told him once. Those words cut deeper than any childhood bully ever had. His personal relationships crumbled. How do you have a real conversation? How do you share your deepest thoughts? How do you connect with another human being when the world only wants you to be silent and silly? His marriage struggled. His friendships became performances. Every social interaction became an exhausting battle between who he really was and who everyone expected him to be. The depression hit like a wave. Dark, relentless, suffocating. There were nights when Rowan would sit alone in his house, surrounded by awards and accolades and fan mail from around the world, and feel completely, utterly empty. The character that was supposed to heal his childhood trauma had become his adult nightmare. And the cruelest irony of all? The world praised him for his silence. Critics wrote essays about the beauty of wordless comedy. Scholars analyzed the profound depth of his nonverbal communication. But nobody asked, nobody wondered, nobody cared about the cost. What does it do to a man's soul to be celebrated for the very thing that was born from his deepest pain? What happens when your greatest strength becomes your greatest weakness? What happens when the thing that saves you slowly starts to destroy you? Rowan Atkinson knew the answer. He was living it every single day. The man who had taught the world that you don't need words to communicate was dying to have a real conversation. The man who had shown everyone that silence could be golden was drowning in it. Here's the truth they don't want you to know. The truth that will change everything. Mr. Bean wasn't comedy. It was therapy. Every stumble, every confused expression, every moment of childlike wonder. It was Rowan Atkinson working through decades of pain in the only way he knew how. That teddy bear Mr. Bean carries everywhere? It represents the childhood innocence that was stolen from him. The security he never had. The unconditional love he desperately craved. Those moments when Mr. Bean gets frustrated and can't express himself? That's not acting. That's the real Rowan, trapped in his own mind, still fighting the stutter that terrorized his youth. The way Mr. Bean retreats into his own world when things get overwhelming? That's exactly how a bullied child learns to survive. By disappearing inside themselves. Every episode was Rowan's subconscious crying out, showing the world what it feels like to be lost, confused, misunderstood, but doing it in a way that made people laugh instead of turning away. He turned his trauma into art, his pain into purpose, his silence into a language that spoke to millions. But here's what broke him. Here's what nearly destroyed him completely. The world laughed at Mr. Bean's struggles. They found joy in his confusion. They were entertained by his inability to fit in. And Rowan realized, people were laughing at the same pain that had almost killed him as a child. The very experiences that had shattered his spirit had become his greatest success. Every laugh from the audience was a reminder of every cruel laugh from his childhood bullies. Every moment of applause was an echo of every moment he had felt worthless and alone. The man who had transformed his deepest wounds into the world's favorite character was slowly bleeding to death from those same wounds. This is why he rarely speaks in public. This is why interviews are torture for him. This is why success feels like failure. Because every time he opens his mouth, he's that stuttering little boy again, waiting for the world to mock him. So the next time you watch Mr. Bean, remember this. You're not watching a comedy. You're watching a masterpiece of human resilience. You're not seeing a funny character. You're seeing a man who refused to let his pain define him, who transformed his darkest moments into light for others. That innocent smile? It cost him everything. That beautiful silence? It was born from unspeakable hurt. That childlike wonder? It's the spirit of a little boy who never gave up, even when the world gave up on him. Rowan Atkinson didn't just create Mr. Bean. He sacrificed himself to give birth to something bigger than his own pain. He took the worst parts of his life and turned them into the best parts of ours. Every time you laughed at Mr. Bean's confusion, you were healing alongside him. Every time you smiled at his innocence, you were witnessing a miracle of the human spirit. Every time you felt joy watching his wordless adventures, you were experiencing the power of someone who refused to let trauma have the final word. This is the truth behind the silence. This is the story behind the laughter. Rowan Atkinson is not just a comedian. He's a survivor, a warrior, a man who took the deepest pain a child can experience and transformed it into the purest joy an adult can share. He gave us Mr. Bean not because he wanted to be famous. He gave us Mr. Bean because he wanted to prove that broken things can still be beautiful. That silent voices can still change the world. That the most wounded hearts often create the most healing art. The man who couldn't speak taught us all how to feel. The child who was silenced by cruelty grew up to fill the world with laughter. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful voice of all. Mr. Bean wasn't acting. He was surviving. And through his survival, he saved us all.